Good morning. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to SSUC, to Spiritual Seekers United in Community. Welcome to this inclusive community where we seek always to live out a more just and generous spirituality. As we gather together in our circles this morning, we gather in the midst of a 3-week series that we've been exploring expansive spirituality, learning and pondering what that means to us, to our community, and how we might seek to live out an expansive spirituality in all that we do. As we gather, we reaffirm that when we do so as community, we don't gather around beliefs and doctrines that demand our agreement, but that we gather around ideas and ways of living that help us to live fully and to love deeply. So as we gather here this morning, we welcome one another into this circle where we can create a community where we all belong, where we're all safe to be ourselves, and where we can question and ponder as we seek to live the meaningful lives we all want to live, as we explore the best of our humanity. Just as we welcome each other here, we also find value in expressing our gratitude for the land and the place in which we gather. This is Treaty 6 territory. It's traditional gathering place for the First Nations, Métis, for so many First Peoples of Canada. And as we recognize that and honor that, we also know that our words must lead us to actions and intentions to live in hope and for strong relationships among Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike, and that we might continue along the path and the road to reconciliation. Before we go any further, we'll take a moment to share a few of the things that are happening in the life and the work of this community. You heard Donna speak of a few ways. There are always ways that we are here and participating, and of course there's the ways that we support with our donations and our financial support. Thank you for all the ways that you have supported us and this community so that we can continue doing the great things and the great work that we do. If you'd like to make a donation today, there's boxes as you leave the main doors that will receive your envelopes. You can donate online at any time on our website. You can purchase grocery cards from David in the foyer that will see a portion of those proceeds come back to us in support. And of course, there's ways to donate automatically so that you don't even have to think about it, but your bank does it for you. So for all the ways that we are able to contribute, thank you very much. And we continue to do the great work because of that.
September 30th is Orange Shirt Day. This is our closest day to gather to that date, and so we are honoring Orange Shirt Day today. This is the time of year when First Nations children were taken from their communities to residential schools. And this is an opportunity for us to draw on the human gift of memory. Memory is that capacity which enables us to learn from the past, sometimes to learn from the mistakes of the past, sometimes to learn and relearn the gifts of the past. As we commemorate this day in wearing the color orange. We hear the story of why we have come to remember this particular incident in our history with this particular color. And so we're going to hear a young person, Phyllis, tell us her story of her orange shirt and her first day at Indian Residential School.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. My name is Phyllis Webstad. I am Shawetm from the Strachem, Kenno Creek, Catletum, Dog Creek First Nation, which is about 1.5 hours southwest from Williams Lake, BC. I grew up with my granny on the Dog Creek Reserve until I was 10, then moved with my auntie after she finished university. When I had just turned 6, I was sent to the St. Joseph Indian Residential School near Williams Lake, a place we called the Mission. My granny bought me a shiny new orange shirt to go to school in. When I got there, I was stripped, my clothing taken away, including my new orange shirt, and I never saw it again. I was no longer excited to be going to school. I wanted to go home to Granny. I had to stay there for 300 sleeps. No matter how much all of us little kids cried, it didn't matter. No one listened to us. Our feelings didn't matter. We didn't matter. I am the 3rd generation that attended residential school. Both my grandmother and mother attended the Mission for 10 years each. Today is a day to honor and remember residential school survivors and their families. Every child matters, even if you're an adult. We must also remember those children that never made it and are no longer with us. Today is a day for survivors to tell their stories and for us to listen with open hearts. I am humbled and honored that you are all taking part in Orange Shirt Day. When I was in school, I didn't know my own history, so I am overjoyed that you are taking part and learning the true history of Canada's First Peoples. Guksjem, thank you.
We sing an affirmation that deep in our hearts we share a common humanity, common dreams, common hopes, common aspirations, a common love, that we are one in our many and diverse ways of expressing our race, our language, our gender identities, our sexual orientations. So we sing together, deep in our hearts. We light this candle knowing we are born of light, and each of us a bearer of light. We have acted in ways from time to time that have diminished the light within ourselves, or have dimmed the light within another, or have failed to see the light within another. We light this candle that we might recognize the light that burns brightly within each of us, the seeking, questing spirit that is at the essence of what it is to be human. We light this candle that we might listen, look for, respond to, pay attention, to light wherever we find it, and within each one of us.
It's time for our Time for All Ages, and it's time to come to the carpet. If anyone would like to come, I have some things that we need to talk about. You're going to sit right there? Perfect. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Come on in. Come sit down. This morning, I thought that we could talk about all the places we learn from, all the wonderful things that we can learn, and where those things come from. Do you remember being a tiny, tiny baby? Do you? Nice. Now, who taught you how to eat? Yourself. Very good. Excellent. Excellent. We are our own teachers, aren't we? That's a very important lesson. We can teach our things, very important things. Who taught you how to, I don't know, put your shoes on? Yourself. Very good. Your mom? Did anyone teach you how to say words? Yourself? Very good. Do you live on your own? No? Wow, you could, I think. We're our own teachers. Our moms or our dads sometimes teach us some very important things like, well, they read to us and they teach us language and they teach us very important things. There are other places. I brought a treasure box full of things that could remind me of the things that teach us stuff. The first one I brought was a picture. What's this a picture of? It looks like school, doesn't it? Here's some kids, and someone's holding a globe. Who do you think that person holding the globe is in this picture? A teacher? Yes. So teachers have some important things to teach us, not only when we're little, but when we're big, we have teachers too. Yeah, because we always want to learn new things, so we find a teacher that can help us learn. Let's see what else is in my box. I brought a big, fat, boring book. It looks like this. It's not a Bible. No. It's just a big book, and I grabbed it off my shelf because I've read this book, most of it. And sometimes books can teach us things. But I also brought a different kind of book because sometimes fun books with pictures in them can also teach us things. I hope you learn some things from fun books. What else? Animals can teach us things. I brought a dog. Aw. What could a dog teach you? Ooh, very good. If you can't see, a dog can help you know where to go. Oh, you know? Yes. Thank you, Silas. This is very good because, again, can help you see. I have a dog at home. That dog teaches me a few things: how to be excited, how to be a very loving creature, and to love you no matter what. Animals can teach us a great deal. Well, I also brought a cat, because that's fair. Do you love cats? I like cats too. You have two. Nice. Well, cats can teach us too. Cats teach us different things, I think. Like, I don't know, how to be confident. Like how to wake up in the morning because they'll just step on your face. That too. Animals can teach us. Let's see what else I've got. Well, I brought this. Well, this is a pussy willow. It grows in little bogs and sloughs and like at the edge of water sometimes, little bushes. And this just reminds me that there are lots of things in nature that we can learn from. We could learn from anything in nature. We could learn from water. We could learn from the sun. The fishes. Yep, totally. Yes, plants. So many things in nature, there are lessons we can learn. Now, my treasure box is empty, but that doesn't mean that that's the only things we learn from. There are so many ways to learn as long as our eyes are open and our ears are listening and our hearts are soft, which means that we're ready. That means we could learn every moment and every day because there's always something to look at and to learn from. So maybe you'll find something new to learn from, like each other, like a leader, like a teacher, like someone who says something, one of your classmates, like one of the adults in the room, or who knows what. Yes, from smart dads too. As long as your eyes and your ears are open and your hearts are soft. Mm-hmm. So thank you for sharing in all these ways we can learn and all these things we can learn from. I hope that you can learn and have some wonderful fun in your programs today. If you're in preschool, our preschool program is going. If you're in elementary, like kindergarten through grade 5, you can go to Kids Spirit, and those two are going to go that way with your leaders. And if you're in junior or senior high school, anyone in this room, our youth cafe. The poem Spring by Mary Oliver. Somewhere a black bear has just risen from sleep and is staring down the mountain. All night in the brisk and shallow restlessness of early spring, I think of her, her 4 black fists flicking the gravel, her tongue like a red fire touching the grass, the cold water. There is only one question: how to love this world. I think of her rising like a black and leafy ledge to sharpen her claws against the silence of the trees. Whatever else my life is, with its poems, with its music and its glass cities, it is also this dazzling darkness coming down the mountain, breathing and tasting. All day I think of her, her white teeth, her wordlessness, her perfect love. In the words of this poet, may we find wisdom for our living.
From the earliest gospel, the collection of stories we have about Jesus of Nazareth, from Mark's gospel written in the last third of the 1st century, this story is passed down to us. Jesus and the disciples came to Jerusalem and they entered the temple. And he began to drive out those who were selling and those who were buying in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. And he wouldn't allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. He was teaching and saying and quoting from his ancient scriptures, "My house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you've made it into a den of robbers." And when the chief priests and the scribes heard it, they kept looking for a way to kill him. They were afraid of him because the crowd was spellbound by his teaching. When evening came, Jesus and his disciples left the city. And when they came again to Jerusalem, and he was walking in the temple, the chief priests and the scribes and the elders came to him and said, "By what authority are you doing these things? Who gave you this authority to do them?" In the words of this ancient story, I was a child in the 60s, but never a child of the 60s. In a time when the call of the day was question authority, I lived in the uncritical zone of my childhood absolutes. There were no gray areas. My young world was clearly black and white, right and wrong, good and bad. And as it happened in the shaping of my early life, Jesus was the answer, and it didn't matter what the question was. And the Bible was my absolute. It was my unwavering authority in all matters. It didn't matter what the subject was. I was pretty certain that the Bible held the answer somewhere. It was many years before my capacity for critical thought evolved, and I began to see how my own spiritual tradition actually invited me to question my authorities and examine my assumptions. And I gradually came to notice how my childhood superhero, Jesus, himself, he had a rather rebellious relationship with authority. We get a little bit of insight into that relationship with authority in that story that I read just a few moments ago. When he tipped over the tables in the temple, they wanted to know, who authorized this? It's not a very thoughtful, probing question dreamed up by open and curious minds. We've heard it countless times. There's not even a hint of originality in that question. When someone asks, so who authorized this? They're not asking who to send a thank you note to. Who authorized this expenditure? Who allowed this activity? Who approved this program? Who gave this idea the go-ahead? They're not asking who to honor, who to celebrate, whose name to put up in the headlines. The question has everything to do with verifying a chain of command. Because the question assumes that what emerges in a society or an institution or an organization ought to have traveled a path that authorizes it. According to the stories we've inherited in our Gospels, it's a question Jesus fielded quite a lot. And it's always asked by the same three groups of people. Those who were transformed by his teaching, or those who were infused by the hope that they experienced in his presence, they never ask who authorized this work. They don't ask to see his resume or review his credentials. The ones who are always doing the security check are those who have something different at stake. He challenges the experts who study the scriptures of his tradition, the religious leaders who prescribe the moral and ethical code, the priests who control the temple practices. In the shorthand of the stories that we receive, they're called the scribes, the Pharisees, and the chief priests. They're as close as you come to being the authorities in a first century Roman-occupied former theocracy. And to be fair, they have every reason to scrutinize the credentials of a guy like Jesus. They've got more reformations going on in the first century than they can manage. They've got the zealots who are organizing to violently overthrow Rome. They've got the Essenes who are reviving Jewish mysticism and drawing adherents away from the mainstream of temple Judaism into a monastic expression of their faith. And then they've got reformers like John the Baptizer and Jesus of Nazareth who have their own unique visions for a kind of peaceful resistance against Rome and renovating or remodeling Temple Judaism. So in this particular story, when they ask Jesus where he gets authority for what he's doing, they're asking who authorized this outrageous behavior in the courtyard of the temple. He's just been seen waving a homemade whip at the merchants and the money changers and overturning the currency dealers' tables and spilling their coins onto the floor. He's ordered the vendors to take the things that are being sold for offerings and get them out of there, to stop making the temple a marketplace and restore it to its original purpose, that it be a house of prayer and a palace of justice. It was an indictment against the current state of his religious tradition, where an empty kind of piety had substituted for a practice of justice, where right rituals had been substituted for right actions. But it wasn't just in the temple that he was tipping over the tables. According to the stories we've received, he spent most of his life tirelessly turning tables. Whether it was the dinner table, where he refused to participate in the exclusionary practices of his time, where the purity laws, had he observed them, those purity laws of his tradition would have kept him from eating with women, eating with Gentiles. And he tipped over the tables of accepted thought, the tables of social norms, the tables of received religion, and the accepted economics of the day. And he invariably placed his passion in the service of his vision, building what he kept calling the kingdom of God, the beloved community. On its face, when they asked, who authorized this behavior? It was a kind of rhetorical question. Clearly no one authorized in first century Palestine had sanctioned his activity. But that question really belies a better question. Underneath it, isn't it really asking, why do you do what you do? How do you do what you do? What drives what you do? What inspires you? What moves you? What motivates you? Was it compassion for the most vulnerable? Or a vision for the possible that inspired the reforms he imagined? Even from the stories we inherit in the Gospels, it's clear that the natural world was a source of authority for Jesus. It shaped his spirituality. He conceives of this beloved community in so many metaphors that spring from the sacred text of the natural world. He talks about this community he imagines and compares it to a mustard seed or a field or a pearl or a vineyard. And the sacred text that he inherited in his own tradition played a role in the way he too understood himself as a reformer, a recalibrator, a reinterpreter, even an embodiment of the tradition he'd received from his law and his prophets. He doesn't leave the interpretation of those texts to the experts, but at every turn he reshapes them with his own wisdom. Over and over again in the stories we receive, we hear him say, "You have heard it said, but I say to you." His authority draws on multiple sources, but it's rooted in the text of his own spiritual experience of seeking meaning. It seems to me that most enduring religious traditions began when someone had an unauthorized experience. Whether it's Moses on the backside of nowhere giving his attention to a brush fire when he was only authorized to be looking after his father-in-law's sheep. Or Buddha, whose transformative experience came out of directly disobeying his father, leaving the protected palace, and seeing a world of suffering for the very first time. Or Jesus, up to his knees in the muddy Jordan. Or Mohammed with his vision of reforming Christianity. Each of them entered into a transforming mystery out of which they lived the rest of their lives. And that's the tradition we inherit. A tradition that begins with an experience, an unauthorized experience. And it doesn't take long. Just a generation or two for the text of that experience to morph into a validating system. For the first century or so after the death of Jesus, authority was vested in those who had had some kind of direct contact with the teacher, the surviving disciples, or the leaders they appointed, or those who founded new communities of this Jewish Reformation across the Roman Empire, in the apostles, in those who came to be named as bishops and overseers. And by the 4th century, there was such diversity and such disagreement about what it meant to be Christian, and so many different practices and understandings. The authorities met for over a year to argue and debate and ultimately shaped the newest agent of authority, called the Creed. But the Creed gave us the same trouble that the law gave Judaism. You need an arbitrator to authorize teachings you didn't think of when you created the Creed or closed the canon. And so that got to us vesting authority in a line of leadership, came to be known as the Pope. And with a few variations on the theme, that got us to the 16th century, when a combination of thinkers like Martin Luther and technology like the printing press got us a new agent of authority, this book. And for the last 500 years or so, this book has held center stage as the authority on all matters of faith and practice. For centuries, whenever we gathered together, whether we just read an account of some battle, or a psalm asking the ruling deity to wipe the enemy off the map, or a story Jesus was said to have told, or a poem expressing delight in one people's escape and the enemy drowning in an ancient sea, or an ancient law about how menstruating women can or can't sit in a particular place, or some prescription about a dietary practice, whenever we've read those words, we've said, "This is the word of God," and we all answered, "Thanks be to God." Because this collection of books became the Protestant expression of the Christian tradition, vesting authority for all matters of faith and practice in a collection of ancient texts that we know is a collection of writings that's a product of two ancient cultures, that's always told us more about their interpretation of their lives than it told us about any divine imperative about how to live. But in practice, even in a nuanced liberal tradition like ours, we've tried to reconcile this collection of writing with what we've come to know about science and human sexuality and literary criticism, and we've still held this collection of material to be our primary source of authority for all matters of faith and practice. But isn't it time for us to live faithfully to what we know? If we're not writing sacred texts with our lives, what the hell are we doing? And why? And if we're not authorized by the text of our own lived experience, what in the world would teach us to trust our own wisdom. And if we're not testing our experience and our wisdom and our instincts with a community that we trust, how isolated and dangerous are we? And if we're not enchanted by the natural world, what would it take to move us? Isn't every leaf and cloud a sacred text, authorizing a witness to the magnificence of life? Are the scriptures of every enduring religious tradition the only sacred texts to shape our lives? Are we not inspired by great literature, by charters of rights and freedoms, by declarations of independence, by music and art, collective statements of our highest dreams and our highest aspirations for being human? Are we not inspired by a generation taking to the streets, inviting us to pay attention to the natural world, to learn from the best science available, to listen to our poets and songwriters, to question what we are told by those who profit from the way things are, and to act on the evidence we have? To live thoughtfully is to be a person of faith. To live thoughtfully is an expression of faith. To question our containers, our inherited language, and our ancient authorities is to be faithful to an evolving spiritual quest. How then do we love this world? How? How do we love this world?
May we place our voices together as we strengthen our intentions in this prayer that we offer to one another and with ourselves. Into this circle we come, opening to wisdom hidden in words and gestures, songs and silences, readings and reflections, prayers and symbols. We gather to touch what matters in ancient texts, the particularity of our own experience, the accumulated wisdom of our humanity, and in the revelation of the natural world. May the wisdom we find inspire us to act justly, lovingly, and courageously as we live each day. May it be so.
Check. Hello? Okay. This morning we're going to introduce a song called For Everyone Born, and it's a piece that has been written for choir and also for congregation. And today we're going to do the choral version, but there are choruses that we'd like to invite you to join and sing along with us, so that when we get to the part over the next few weeks, I hope, we'll introduce the version for everyone to sing the whole song, that you'll be familiar with it. So the notes, the cues will be bolded so that you can tell when it's your turn, and I'll turn around and give you a cue as well. And the words that you'll see are, and we will delight when we are created in justice. So those will be the notes or the words that you'll see. Okay.
According to the world of our story, when Jesus was asked by the authorities of his day to identify which law was the most important, what really mattered, he said it all came down to love. Loving the source of life, loving each other, loving the life we've been given. The poet said it this way: there's only one question: how to love this world. There are many questions. There's one question to live our lives in answer to, and that is, how then do we love this world?